This is Tape 1, Side 1, The Advent of Divine Justice by Shoghi Effendi, Baha'i Publishing Trust, Wilmette, Illinois. Copyright 1939, 1963, 1967, 1984 by the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. All rights reserved. This tape has been made for the Baha'i Service for the Blind, February, year 2000. Your reader is Bill Peary. Contents. With the approval of the Universal House of Justice, the editors have eliminated the subheadings added to the first edition of the Advent of Divine Justice in 1939, and have instead prepared a table of contents based on the principle of identifying themes section by section that appear in the book. Preface, Roman page 9. Overview of the North American Baha'i community, its successes, responsibilities, and glorious future, pages 1 through 16. I'm not going to give the page numbers for these subsections, just simply the sections titles. These are based on the original subheadings that were in the first edition. Behalf of the community, the crises affecting the Baha'i and non-Baha'i world, the unique station of the North American Baha'i, community, the prime mover and pattern for Western Baha'i communities, the torchbearers of the cause, the spiritual descendants of the dawnbreakers, the cradle of the administrative order, the achievements of the American Baha'is, the tasks lying ahead of the American believers, the spread of the faith in the Western Hemisphere, the spread of the faith around the world, the as yet unnamed mission of the future, the opportunities of the distant future, Baha'u'llah's promised aid, the importance of daily exertions. Call for the acquisition of virtues needed to equip the North American Baha'is to fulfill their destiny, pages 16 through 43. A warning about the shortcomings of North Americans, the importance of purging inherited national flaws, the cultivation of spiritual qualities essential for all teaching plans, temple projects, and financial plans. Introduction, rectitude of conduct, chastity and holiness, freedom from prejudice. Summary, weapons for regenerating the Baha'i and non-Baha'i communities. Call for the fulfillment of the material aspect of America's task upon which depends future successes, pages 43 through 72. The challenge of the temple, the challenge of teaching, universal participation, the urgency of teaching, prerequisites for successful teaching, prerequisites for pioneers, individual initiative, considering opportunities and planning methods for expansion and consolidation, working with administrative agencies, making teaching the first priority, teaching minorities, winning home front goals, winning foreign goals, administrative preparation for teaching, individual preparation for teaching, assurances of aid, establishing foundations for local and national institutions, translating literature, finding souls of receptivity and capacity, appeal for self-supporting and deputized pioneers, the importance of collaborating with Baha'i institutions and native believers, the importance of self-supporting pioneers, tribute to women pioneers, appeal to youth to help win goals, the special importance of Panama. Assurance of the North American Baha'i community's success in the unfoldment of Abdu'l-Baha's Tablets of the Divine Plan, pages 72 through 85. Abdu'l-Baha's assurance of North America's destiny, Shoghi Effendi's faith in the North American Baha'is, passages from the writings of Baha'u'llah to aid in discharging multiple tasks, the high station of the people of Baha, the greatness of the Day of God, the regeneration of human life, warnings and counsels about the end of an age, the paramount importance of teaching. The Destiny of America, pages 85 through 91. The index has been omitted from this reading. On page 9. Preface. From the earliest years of his ministry as a divinely appointed guardian of the cause of God, Shoghi Effendi conferred upon the Baha'is of North America a very special bounty in addressing to them a series of inspiring and challenging messages, carefully delineating the tasks they were called upon to discharge, and emphasizing the relationship of these goals to the fulfillment of their destiny as the chosen instruments for the execution of the divine plan of Abdu'l-Baha. Of all these communications, perhaps the one most directly related to the life of the individual Baha'i was The Advent of Divine Justice, written in 1938, in which the Guardian set forth the spiritual prerequisites for success in every activity for the advancement of the faith. Special emphasis was placed not only upon the imponderable factors associated with the inner life of the spirit, but also upon the human and social relationships which must be cultivated and made an integral part of the daily life of every Baha'i. Describing with amazing accuracy the basic ills afflicting the American body politic, as well as indicating the probable course of world events which were destined to create new challenges and opportunities for the American nation, Shoghi Effendi in this portentous message clearly defined the role the American Baha'is would be called upon to play in the years ahead. At this time, when so many of the prophetic utterances of both Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi relating to America have a deeper meaning and significance than ever before in their impact on the activities of the American believers, it is particularly befitting that a new edition of the Advent of Divine Justice be made available, providing the opportunity for every Baha'i to glean from a careful study of its pages a clearer understanding of the true purpose of our faith, of America's spiritual destiny, and of the manner in which the individual believer is called upon to contribute to the achievement of this destiny, both on the home front and in foreign fields of service. Paul Haney, Baha'i World Center, Haifa, Israel, November 1968. Page 1. The Advent of Divine Justice. To the beloved of God and the handmaids of the merciful throughout the United States and Canada, best beloved brothers and sisters, in the love of Baha'u'llah. It would be difficult indeed to adequately express the feelings of irrepressible joy and exultation that flood my heart every time I pause to contemplate the ceaseless evidences of a dynamic energy which animates the stalwart pioneers of the world order of Baha'u'llah in the execution of the plan committed to their charge. The signature of the contract by your elected national representatives, signalizing the opening of the final phase of the greatest enterprise ever launched by the followers of the faith of Baha'u'llah in the West, no less than the extremely heartening progress recorded in the successive reports of their National Teaching Committee, attest beyond the shadow of a doubt the fidelity, the vigor, and the thoroughness with which you are conducting the manifold operations which the evolution of the 7-year plan must necessarily involve. In both of its aspects and in all its details, it is being prosecuted with exemplary regularity and precision, with undiminished efficiency and commendable dispatch. The resourcefulness which the national representatives of the American believers have in recent months so strikingly demonstrated, as evidenced by the successive measures they have adopted, has been matched by the loyal, the unquestioning, and generous support accorded them by all those whom they represent, at every critical stage and with every fresh advance in the discharge of their sacred duties. Page 2. Such close interaction, such complete cohesion, such continual harmony and fellowship between the various agencies that contribute to the organic life and constitute the basic framework of every properly functioning Baha'i community is a phenomenon which offers a striking contrast to the disruptive tendencies which the discordant elements of present-day society so tragically manifest. Whereas every apparent trial with which the unfathomable wisdom of the Almighty deems it necessary to afflict His chosen community serves only to demonstrate afresh its essential solidarity and to consolidate its inward strength, each of the successive crises in the fortunes of a decadent age exposes more convincingly than the one preceding it the corrosive influences that are fast sapping the vitality and undermining the basis of its declining institutions. For such demonstrations of the interpositions of an ever-watchful providence, they who stand identified with the community of the Most Great Name must feel eternally grateful. From every fresh token of His unfailing blessing on the one hand, and of His visitation on the other, they cannot but derive immense hope and courage. Alert to seize every opportunity which the revolutions of the wheel of destiny within their faith offers them, and undismayed by the prospect of spasmodic convulsions that must sooner or later fatally affect those who have refused to embrace its light, they and those who will labor after them must press forward until the processes now set in motion will have each spent its force and contributed its share towards the birth of the order now stirring in the womb of a travailing age. These recurrent crises, which, with ominous frequency and resistless force, are afflicting an ever-increasing portion of the human race, must of necessity continue, however impermanently, to exercise in a certain measure their baleful influence upon a world community which has spread its ramifications to the uttermost ends of the earth. Page 3. How can the beginnings of a world upheaval, unleashing forces that are so gravely deranging the social, the religious, the political, and the economic equilibrium of organized society, throwing into chaos and confusion political systems, racial doctrines, social conceptions, cultural standards, religious associations, and trade relationships, how can such agitations on a scale so vast, so unprecedented, fail to produce any repercussions on the institutions of a faith of such tender age, whose teachings have a direct and vital bearing on each of these spheres of human life and conduct? Little wonder, therefore, if they who are holding aloft the banner of so pervasive a faith, so challenging a cause, find themselves affected by the impact of these world-shaking forces. Little wonder if they find that in the midst of this whirlpool of contending passions, their freedom has been curtailed, their tenets contempted, their institutions assaulted, their motives maligned, their authority jeopardized, their claim rejected. In the heart of the European continent, a community which, as predicted by Abdu'l-Baha, is destined by virtue of its spiritual potentialities and geographical situation to radiate the splendor of the light of the faith on the countries that surround it, has been momentarily eclipsed through the restrictions which a regime that has sorely misapprehended its purpose and function has chosen to impose upon it. Its voice, alas, is now silenced, its institutions dissolved, its literature banned, its archives confiscated, and its meetings suspended. In Central Asia, in the city enjoying the unique distinction of having been chosen by Abdu'l-Baha as the home of the first magical ashkar of the Baha'i world, as well as in the towns and villages of the province to which it belongs, the sore-pressed faith of Baha'u'llah, as a result of the extraordinary and unique vitality which in the course of several decades it has consistently manifested, finds itself at the mercy of foes which, alarmed at its rising power, are now bent on reducing it to utter impotence. Page 4. Its temple, though still used for purposes of Baha'i worship, has been expropriated, its assemblies and committees disbanded, its teaching activities crippled, its chief promoters deported, and not a few of its most enthusiastic supporters, both men and women, imprisoned. In the land of its birth, wherein reside the immense majority of its followers, a country whose capital has been hailed by Baha'u'llah as the mother of the world and the dayspring of the joy of mankind, a civil authority as yet undivorced officially from the paralyzing influences of an antiquated, a fanatical, and outrageously corrupt clergy, pursues relentlessly its campaign of repression against the adherents of a faith which it has for well-nigh a century striven unsuccessfully to suppress. Indifferent to the truth that the members of this innocent and proscribed community can justly claim to rank as among the most disinterested, the most competent, and the most ardent lovers of their native land, contemptuous of their high sense of world citizenship, which the advocates of an excessive and narrow nationalism can never hope to appreciate, such an authority refuses to grant to a faith which extends its spiritual jurisdiction over well-nigh 600 local communities, and which numerically outnumbers the adherents of either the Christian, the Jewish, or the Zoroastrian faiths in that land, the necessary legal right to enforce its laws, to administer its affairs, to conduct its schools, to celebrate its festivals, to circulate its literature, to solemnize its rites, to erect its edifices, and to safeguard its endowments. And now recently in the Holy Land itself, the heart and nerve center of a world-embracing faith, the fires of racial animosity, of fratricidal strife, of unabashed terrorism, have lit a conflagration that gravely interferes, on the one hand, with that flow of pilgrims that constitutes the lifeblood of that center, and suspends, on the other, the various projects that have been initiated in connection with the preservation and extension of the areas surrounding the sacred spots it enshrines. The safety of the small community of resident believers, faced by the rising tide of lawlessness, has been imperiled, its status as a neutral and distinct community indirectly challenged, and its freedom to carry out certain of its observances curtailed. Page 5. A series of murderous assaults, alternating with outbursts of bitter fanaticism, both racial and religious, involving the leaders as well as the followers of the three leading faiths in that distracted country, have at times threatened to sever all normal communications both within its confines as well as with the outside world. Perilous though the situation has been, the Baha'i holy places, the object of the adoration of a world-encircling faith, have, notwithstanding their number and exposed position, and though to outward seeming deprived of any means of protection, been vouchsafed to preservation little short of miraculous. A world torn with conflicting passions and perilously disintegrating from within finds itself confronted, at so crucial an epoch in its history, by the rising fortunes of an infant faith, a faith that, at times, seems to be drawn into its controversies, entangled by its conflicts, eclipsed by its gathering shadows, and overpowered by the mounting tide of its passions. In its very heart, within its cradle, at the seat of its first and venerable temple, in one of its hitherto flourishing and potentially powerful centers, the as yet unemancipated faith of Baha'u'llah seems indeed to have retreated before the onrushing forces of violence and disorder, to which humanity is steadfastly falling a victim. The strongholds of such a faith, one by one and day after day, are to outward seeming being successfully isolated, assaulted, and captured. As the lights of liberty flicker and go out, as the din of discord grows louder and louder every day, as the fires of fanaticism flame with increasing fierceness in the breasts of men, as the chill of irreligion creeps relentlessly over the soul of mankind, the limbs and organs that constitute the body of the faith of Baha'u'llah appear in varying measure to have become afflicted with the crippling influences that now hold in their grip the whole of the civilized world. Page 6. How clearly and strikingly the following words of Abdu'l-Baha are being demonstrated at this hour. Quote, "The darkness of error that has enveloped the East and the West is in this most great cycle battling with the light of divine guidance. Its swords and its spears are very sharp and pointed, its army keenly bloodthirsty." End quote. This day, he in another passage has written, quote, "The powers of all the leaders of religion are directed towards the dispersion of the congregation of the All-Merciful and the shattering of the divine edifice. The hosts of the world, whether material, cultural, or political, are from every side launching their assault, for the cause is great, very great. Its greatness is, in this day, clear and manifest to men's eyes." End quote. The one chief remaining citadel, the mighty arm which still raises aloft the standard of an unconquerable faith, is none other than the blessed community of the followers of the most great name in the North American continent. By its works and through the unfailing protection vouchsafed to it by an almighty providence, this distinguished member of the body of the constantly interacting Baha'i communities of East and West bids fair to be universally regarded as the cradle, as well as the stronghold, of that future New World Order, which is at once the promise and the glory of the dispensation associated with the name of Baha'u'llah. Let anyone inclined to either belittle the unique station conferred upon this community, or to question the role it will be called upon to play in the days to come, ponder the implication of these pregnant and highly illuminating words uttered by Abdu'l-Baha, and addressed to it at a time when the fortunes of a world groaning beneath the burden of a devastating war had reached their lowest ebb. Quote, "The continent of America," he so significantly wrote, "is in the eyes of the one true God, the land wherein the splendors of his light shall be revealed, where the mysteries of his faith shall be unveiled, where the righteous will abide and the free assemble." End quote. Already the community of the believers of North American continent, at once the prime mover and pattern of the future communities which the faith of Baha'u'llah is destined to raise up through the length and breadth of the Western Hemisphere, has, despite the prevailing gloom, shown its capacity to be recognized as the torchbearer of that light, the repository of those mysteries, the exponent of that righteousness, and the sanctuary of that freedom. Page 7. To what other light can these above-quoted words possibly allude, if not to the light of the glory of the golden age of the faith of Baha'u'llah? What mysteries could Abdu'l-Baha have contemplated except the mysteries of that embryonic world order now evolving within the matrix of his administration? What righteousness, if not the righteousness whose reign that age and that order can alone establish? What freedom but the freedom which the proclamation of his sovereignty in the fullness of time must bestow? The community of the organized promoters of the faith of Baha'u'llah in the American continent, the spiritual descendants of the dawnbreakers of an heroic age, who by their death proclaimed the birth of that faith, must in turn usher in, not by their death, but through living sacrifice, that promised world order, the shall ordained to enshrine that priceless jewel, the world civilization of which the faith itself is the sole begetter. While its sister communities are bending beneath the tempestuous winds that beat upon them from every side, this community, preserved by the immutable decrees of the omnipotent ordainer, and deriving continual sustenance from the mandate with which the tablets of the divine plan have invested it, is now busily engaged in laying the foundations and in fostering the growth of these institutions which are to herald the approach of the age destined to witness the birth and rise of the world order of Baha'u'llah. A community relatively negligible in its numerical strength, separated by vast distances from both the focal center of its faith and the land wherein the preponderating mass of its fellow believers reside, bereft in the main of material resources and lacking in experience and in prominence, ignorant of the beliefs, concepts, and habits of those peoples and races from which its spiritual founders have sprung, wholly unfamiliar with the languages in which its sacred books were originally revealed, constrained to place its sole reliance upon an inadequate rendering of only a fragmentary portion of the literature embodying its laws, its tenets, and its history, subjected from its infancy to tests of extreme severity, involving at times the defection of some of its most prominent members, having to contend ever since its inception and in an ever-increasing measure with the forces of corruption, of moral laxity, and ingrained prejudice, such a community, in less than half a century, and unaided by any of its sister communities, whether in the East or in the West, has, by virtue of the celestial potency with which an all-living Master has abundantly endowed it, lent an impetus to the onward march of the cause it has espoused, which the combined achievements of its co-religionists in the West have failed to revive. Page 8. What other community, it can confidently be asked, has been instrumental in fixing the pattern and in imparting the original impulse to those administrative institutions that constitute the vanguard of the world order of Baha'u'llah? What other community has been capable of demonstrating with such consistency the resourcefulness, the discipline, the iron determination, the zeal and perseverance, the devotion and fidelity, so indispensable to the erection and the continued extension of the framework within which those nascent institutions can alone multiply and mature? What other community has proved itself to be fired by so noble a vision, or willing to rise to such heights of self-sacrifice, or ready to achieve so great a measure of solidarity, as to be able to raise in so short a time, and in the course of such crucial years, an edifice that can well deserve to be regarded as the greatest contribution ever made by the West to the cause of Baha'u'llah? What other community can justifiably lay claim to have succeeded through the unsupported efforts of one of its humble members in securing the spontaneous allegiance of royalty to its cause, and in winning such marvelous and written testimonies to its truth? Page 9. What other community has shown the foresight, the organizing ability, the enthusiastic eagerness that have been responsible for the establishment and multiplication through its territory of those initial schools which, as time goes by, will, on the one hand, evolve into powerful centers of Baha'i learning, and on the other provide a fertile recruiting ground for the enrichment and consolidation of its teaching force? What other community has produced pioneers combining to such a degree the essential qualities of audacity, of consecration, of tenacity, of self-renunciation, and unstinted devotion that have prompted them to abandon their homes and forsake their all, and scatter over the surface of the globe, and hoist in its uttermost corners the triumphant banner of Baha'u'llah? Who else but the members of this community have won the eternal distinction of being the first to raise the call of Ya Baha'u'llah in such highly important and widely scattered centers and territories as the hearts of both the British and French empires, Germany, the Far East, the Balkan states, the Scandinavian countries, Latin America, the islands of the Pacific, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and now more recently the Baltic states? Who else but those same pioneers have shown themselves ready to undertake the labor, to exercise the patience, and to provide the funds required for the translation and publication in no less than 40 languages of their sacred literature, the dissemination of which is an essential prerequisite to any effectively organized campaign of teaching? What other community can lay claim to have had a decisive share in the worldwide efforts that have been exerted for the safeguarding and the extension of the immediate surroundings of its holy shrines, as well as for the preliminary acquisition of the future sites of its international institution at its world center? What other community can, to its eternal credit, claim to have been the first to frame its national and local constitutions, thereby laying down the fundamental lines of the twin charters designed to regulate the activities, define the functions, and safeguard the rights of its institutions? Page 10. What other community can boast of having simultaneously acquired and legally secured the basis of its national endowments, thus paving the way for a similar action on the part of its local communities? What other community has achieved the supreme distinction of having obtained, long before any of its sister communities had envisioned such a possibility, the necessary documents assuring the recognition by both the federal and state authorities of its spiritual assemblies and national endowments? And finally, what other community has had the privilege and been granted the means to succor the needy, to plead the cause of the downtrodden, and to intervene so energetically for the safeguarding of Baha'i edifices and institutions in countries such as Persia, Egypt, Iraq, Russia, and Germany, where at various times its fellow believers have had to suffer the rigors of both religious and racial persecution? Such a matchless and brilliant record of service, extending over a period of well-nigh 20 years, and so closely interwoven with the interests and fortunes of such a large section of the worldwide Baha'i community, deserves to rank as a memorable chapter in the history of the formative period of the faith of Baha'u'llah. Reinforced and enriched as it is by the memory of the American believers' earlier achievements, such a record is in itself convincing testimony to their ability to befittingly shoulder the responsibilities which any task may impose upon them in the future. To overrate the significance of these manifold services would be well nigh impossible. To appraise correctly their value and dilate on their merits and immediate consequences is a task which only a future Baha'i historian can properly discharge. I can only for the present place on record my profound conviction that a community capable of showing forth such deeds, of evincing such a spirit, of rising to such heights, cannot but be already possessed of such potentialities as will enable it to vindicate in the fullness of time its right to be acclaimed as the chief creator and champion of the world order of Baha'u'llah. Page 11. Magnificent as has been this record, reminiscent as it is in some of its aspects of the exploits with which the dawnbreakers of an heroic age have proclaimed the birth of the faith itself, the task associated with the name of this privileged community is, far from approaching its climax, only beginning to unfold. What the American believers have, within the space of almost 50 years, achieved is infinitesimal when compared to the magnitude of the tasks ahead of them. The rumblings of that catastrophic upheaval, which is to proclaim at one and the same time the death pangs of the old order and the birth pangs of the new, indicate both the steady approach as well as the awe-inspiring character of those tasks. The virtual establishment of the administrative order of their faith, the erection of its framework, the fashioning of its instruments, and the consolidation of its subsidiary institutions was the first task committed to their charge as an organized community called into being by the will and under the instructions of Abdu'l-Baha. Of this initial task they have acquitted themselves with marvelous promptitude, fidelity, and vigor. No sooner had they created and correlated the various and necessary agencies for the efficient conduct of any policy they might subsequently wish to initiate, then they addressed themselves with equal zest and consecration to the next more arduous task of erecting the superstructure of an edifice, the cornerstone of which Abdu'l-Baha himself had laid. And when that feat was achieved, this community, alive to the passionate pleas, exhortations, and promises recorded in the tablets of the divine plan, resolved to undertake yet another task, which in its scope and spiritual potentialities is sure to outshine any of the works they have already accomplished. Launching with unquenchable enthusiasm and dauntless courage the 7-year plan as a first and practical step towards the fulfillment of the mission prescribed in those epoch-making tablets, they entered with a spirit of renewed consecration upon their dual task, the consummation of which, it is hoped, will synchronize with the celebration of the centenary of the birth of the faith of Baha'u'llah, page 12. Well aware that every advance made in the external ornamentation of their majestic edifice would directly react on the progress of the teaching campaign initiated by them in both the northern and southern American continents, and realizing that every victory gained in the teaching field would, in its turn, facilitate the work and hasten the completion of their temple, they are now pressing on with courage and faith in their efforts to discharge in both of its phases their obligations under the plan they have dedicated themselves to execute. Let them not, however, imagine that the carrying out of the 7-year plan, coinciding as it does with the termination of the first century of the Baha'i era, signifies either the termination of or even an interruption in the work which the unerring hand of the Almighty is directing them to perform. The opening of the 2nd century of the Baha'i era must needs disclose greater vistas, usher in further stages, and witness the initiation of plans more far-reaching than any as yet conceived. The plan on which is now focused the attention, the aspirations, and the resources of the entire community of the American believers should be viewed as a mere beginning, as a trial of strength, a stepping stone to a crusade of still greater magnitude, if the duties and responsibilities with which the author of the divine plan has invested them are to be honorably and entirely fulfilled. For the consummation of the present plan can result in no more than the formation of at least one center in each of the republics of the Western Hemisphere, whereas the duties prescribed in those tablets call for a wider diffusion and imply the scattering of a far greater and more representative number of the members of the North American Baha'i community over the entire surface of the New World. It is the undoubted mission of the American believers, therefore, to carry forward into the 2nd century the glorious work initiated in the closing years of the first, page 13. Not until they have played their part in guiding the activities of these isolated and newly fledged centers, and in fostering their capacity to initiate in their turn institutions, both local and national, modeled on their own, can they be satisfied to have adequately discharged their immediate obligations under Abdu'l-Baha's divinely revealed plan. Nor should it for a moment be supposed that the completion of a task which aims at the multiplication of Baha'i centers and the provision of the assistance and guidance necessary for the establishment of the administrative order of the Baha'i faith in the countries of Latin America realizes in its entirety the scheme visualized for them by Abdu'l-Baha. A perusal, however perfunctory, of those tablets embodying his plan will instantly reveal a scope for their activities that stretches far beyond the confines of the Western Hemisphere. With their inter-American tasks and responsibilities virtually discharged, their intercontinental mission enters upon its most glorious and decisive phase. Quote, "The moment this divine message," Abdu'l-Baha himself has written, "is carried forward by the American believers from the shores of America and is propagated through the continents of Europe, of Asia, of Africa, and of Australasia, and as far as the islands of the Pacific, this community will find itself securely established upon the throne of an everlasting dominion." End quote. And who knows but when this colossal task has been accomplished, a greater, a still more superb mission, incomparable in its splendor and foreordained for them by Baha'u'llah, may not be thrust upon them. The glories of such a mission are of such dazzling splendor, the circumstances attending it so remote, and the contemporary events with the culmination of which it is so closely knit in such a state of flux, that it would be premature to attempt, at the present time, any accurate delineation of its features. Suffice it to say that out of the turmoil and tribulations of these latter years, opportunities undreamt of will be born, and circumstances unpredictably created, that will enable, nay, impel, the victorious prosecutors of Abdu'l-Baha's plan, to add, through the part they will play in the unrolling of the New World Order, fresh laurels to the crown of their servitude to the threshold of Baha'u'llah. Page 14. Nor should any of the manifold opportunities of a totally different order be allowed to pass unnoticed which the evolution of the faith itself, whether at its world center or in the North American continent, or even in the most outlying regions of the earth, must create, calling once again upon the American believers to play a part, no less conspicuous than the share they have previously had in their collective contributions to the propagation of the cause of Baha'u'llah. I can only for the moment cite at random certain of these opportunities which stand out preeminently in any attempt to survey the possibilities of the future. The election of the International House of Justice and its establishment in the Holy Land, the spiritual and administrative center of the Baha'i world, together with the formation of its auxiliary branches and subsidiary institutions, the gradual erection of the various dependencies of the First Magical Ashkar of the West, and the intricate issues involving the establishment and the extension of the structural basis of Baha'i community life, the codification and promulgation of the ordinances of the Most Holy Book, necessitating the formation in certain countries of the East of properly constituted and officially recognized courts of Baha'i law, the building of the third Magical Ashkar of the Baha'i world in the outskirts of the city of Tehran, to be followed by the rise of a similar house of worship in the Holy Land itself, the deliverance of Baha'i communities from the fetters of religious orthodoxy in such Islamic countries as Persia, Iraq, and Egypt, and the consequent recognition by the civil authorities in those states of the independent status and religious character of the Baha'i national and local assemblies, the precautionary and defensive measures to be devised, coordinated, and carried out to counteract the full force of the inescapable attacks which the organized efforts of an ecclesiastical organization of various denominations will progressively launch and relentlessly pursue. Page 15. And last but not least, the multitudinous issues that must be faced, the obstacles that must be overcome, and the responsibilities that must be assumed to enable a sore-tried faith to pass through the successive stages of unmitigated obscurity, of active repression, and of complete emancipation, leading in turn to its being acknowledged as an independent faith, enjoying the status of full equality with its sister religions, to be followed by its establishment and recognition as a state religion, which in turn must give way to its assumption of the rights and prerogatives associated with the Baha'i state, functioning in the plenitude of its powers, a stage which must ultimately culminate in the emergence of a worldwide Baha'i Commonwealth, animated wholly by the Spirit and operating solely in direct conformity with the laws and principles of Baha'u'llah. The challenge offered by these opportunities, the American believers, I feel confident, will, in addition to their answer to the teaching call voiced by Abdu'l-Baha in his tablets, unhesitatingly take up, and will, with their traditional fearlessness, tenacity, and efficiency, so respond to it as to confirm before all the world their title and rank as the champion builders of the mightiest institutions of the faith of Baha'u'llah. Dearly beloved friends, though the task be long and arduous, yet the prize which the all-bountiful bestower has chosen to confer upon you is of such preciousness that neither tongue nor pen can befittingly appraise it. Though the goals towards which you are now so strenuously striving be distant, and as yet undisclosed to men's eyes, yet its promise lies firmly embedded in the authoritative and unalterable utterances of Baha'u'llah. Though the course he has traced for you seems at times lost in the threatening shadows with which a stricken humanity is now enveloped, and yet the unfailing light he has caused to shine continually upon you is of such brightness that no earthly dusk can ever eclipse its splendor. Page 16. Though small in numbers, and circumscribed as yet in your experiences, powers, and resources, yet the force which energizes your mission is limitless in its range and incalculable in its potency. Though the enemies which every acceleration in the progress of your mission must raise up be fierce, numerous, and unrelenting, yet the invisible hosts which, if you persevere, must, as promised, rush forth to your aid, will in the end enable you to vanquish their hopes and annihilate their forces. Though the ultimate blessings that must crown the consummation of your mission be undoubted, and the divine promises given you firm and irrevocable, Yet the measure of the goodly reward which every one of you is to reap must depend on the extent to which your daily exertions will have contributed to the expansion of that mission and the hastening of its triumph. Dearly beloved friends, great as is my love and admiration for you, convinced as I am of your paramount share which you can and will undoubtedly have in both the continental and international spheres of future Baha'i activity and service, I feel it nevertheless incumbent upon me to utter at this juncture a word of warning. The glowing tributes, so repeatedly and deservedly paid to the capacity, the spirit, the conduct, and the high rank of the American believers, both individually and as an organic community, must under no circumstances be confounded with the characteristics and nature of the people from which God has raised them up. A sharp distinction between that community and the people must be made, and resolutely and fearlessly upheld, if we wish to give due recognition to the transmuting power of the faith of Baha'u'llah and its impact on the lives and standards of those who have chosen to enlist under his banner. Otherwise, the supreme and distinguishing function of his revelation, which is none other than the calling into being of a new race of men, will remain wholly unrecognized and completely obscured. Page 17. How often have the prophets of God, not excepting Baha'u'llah himself, chosen to appear and deliver their message in countries and amidst peoples and races at a time when they were either fast declining or had already touched the lowest depths of moral and spiritual degradation. The appalling misery and wretchedness to which the Israelites had sunk under the debasing and tyrannical rule of the Pharaohs in the days preceding their exodus from Egypt under the leadership of Moses, the decline that had set in the religious, the spiritual, the cultural, and the moral life of the Jewish people at the time of the appearance of Jesus Christ, the barbarous cruelty, the gross idolatry and immorality which had for so long been the distressing features of the tribes of Arabia and brought such shame upon them when Muhammad arose to proclaim his message in their midst, the indescribable state of decadence with its attendant corruption, confusion, intolerance, and oppression in both the civil and religious life of Persia, so graphically portrayed by the pen of a considerable number of scholars, diplomats, and travelers at the hour of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, all demonstrate this basic and inescapable fact. To contend that the innate worthiness, the high moral standard, the political aptitude, and social attainments of any race or nation is the reason for the appearance in its midst of any of these divine luminaries would be an absolute perversion of historical facts and would amount to a complete repudiation of the undoubted interpretation placed upon them so clearly and emphatically by both Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. How great then must be the challenge to those who, belonging to such races and nations, and having responded to the call which these prophets have raised, to unreservedly recognize and courageously testify to this indisputable truth, that not by reason of any racial superiority, political capacity, or spiritual virtue which a race or nation might possess, but rather as a direct consequence of its crying needs, its lamentable degeneracy, and irremediable perversity, has the prophet of God chosen to appear in its midst, and with it as a lever has lifted the entire human race to a higher and nobler plane of life and conduct. Page 18. For it is precisely under such circumstances and by such means that the prophets have from time immemorial chosen and were able to demonstrate their redemptive power to raise from the depths of abasement and of misery the people of their own race and nation, empowering them to transmit in turn to other races and nations the saving grace and the energizing influence of their revelation. This is the end of side 1 of tape 1, ending on page 18. Please stop the tape, turn it over, and continue on side 2.